Zimbabwe's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Dr. David Musabayana, has called upon members of the Pan-African Parliament to lobby for the lifting of economic sanctions against the Republic of Zimbabwe. Right now in studio, I have the Deputy Minister to take the discussion further. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon, Palisa. Good afternoon, viewers.
All right, so you're here canvassing for the removal of sanctions on Zimbabwe. Just describe to us really the sanctions on the country. We've always understood them to be targeted sanctions on specific people and specific businesses. School us a bit on these sanctions.
Thank you, Palisa. The sanction, initially, the sanction were targeting individuals and organizations, like corporate organizations that were involved or linked some to the government. But over the years, we've realized that the sanction tentacles have been broadened. So to the extent that some banks and some other institutions have been penalized for dealing with government or transacting or doing transaction on behalf of government. So they've affected the whole political ecosystem of the country. So and the economic ecosystem of the country.
So it's not just on specific businesses and people, it's the country as a whole.
Yes, the country as a whole.
But then how do you explain trade between the United States and Zimbabwe? Because one believes that that trade has been increasing over the years.
The trade between Zimbabwe and the United States of America has not been going on well. Before the economic sanction, they were one of the key consumers of our tobacco. But then after the imposition of economic sanction, that stopped. So, and most of our tobacco is now going through to China. So trade has not been going on well, and there is very little that we are taking from United States of America. And also, we used to benefit more from the foreign direct investment that was coming from the United States of America, and that has not been happening. And over and above that, we're also looking at the trade lines, credit lines that were provided for by United States of America and institutions within the United States of America, like the IMF. They are no longer doing business with Zimbabwe, and that's the biggest challenge that we have.
But I remember the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State at some point, he did say that these sanctions are against certain individuals and certain corporations, as we said, not against Zimbabwe as a whole. And he went on to say that there is really nothing stopping the United States from doing business with Zimbabwe or from stopping Zimbabweans traveling to the United States, for example.
Thank you, Palisa. That's the narrative and perception that has been created. But in reality, what is happening on the ground is that the sanction itself creates an environment that is caustic to business operations. It's also an environment, like I've always said, sanctions are to an economy what the soil pH is to a plant ecosystem. It's not about how much management or fertilizers that you put to the plant or avail to the plant. As long as the pH is wrong, nothing will happen. So the same thing is happening to the economic sanctions. They've created this wrong economic ecosystem. So the ecosystem is toxic. No investor was willing to come to Zimbabwe because people have been penalized for dealing with Zimbabwe. One bank was penalized about 3.6 billion, and some of the assets of some companies, in our country, like one of our fertilizer company, the assets were frozen. And some credit lines that were on their way to Zimbabwe were also blocked. We've also realized that each time the government has signed mega deals with foreign investors, when it comes to the consummation of the deals, the money transfers are blocked. And that's why we are saying sanctions must go. Besides, the economic sanctions were to do with certain alleged violations, human rights violations. And with the new dispensation, this has since stopped, and we are working with the opposition and the rest of the community.
Let's talk about that political reform, because I remember correctly that it was around last year this time when President Donald Trump's administration was basically saying that the sanctions will be removed once Zimbabwe has achieved that political reform. How far are you in terms of satisfying that particular requirement?
Thank you very much, Palisa. In terms of political reforms, there are a lot of political reforms going on in our country, but we are not doing them so that sanctions are removed. The political reforms are taking place with some pieces of legislation which has been viewed by certain sectors of certain countries that they are not progressive. We have repealed those, like we had POSA, which was a legislation that restricted free demonstration, freedom of assembly, but it has been repealed, and a progressive legislation called MOPA has been put in place, which work together with the opposition. IPA, which was also another legislation, which was also cited by United States of America, has also been repealed, where we have come up with 3 pieces of legislation that allow free access to the media, even for the opposition. Also, it also allows access to information and also protection of certain information for personal information. We have also a number of political reforms that have taken place. The president has put together a forum where all political players who participated in the past election of 2018 were been called to come and meet the president and have discourse that is progressive, where he also accepts positive and even negative criticism and put it on the economic and political agenda. Unfortunately, 4 of the key players have not come to the party, but we are still negotiating and encouraging them to come on board. So the president has been opening his doors to meet the diplomatic community, and also all sectors of all provinces of the country are now meeting the president. All the important key stakeholders, traditional leaders, and all past misdeeds that are perceived by our society as creating divisions within the political economy have also been addressed, where president is also dealing with issues around massacres that happened around the 1980s against a certain tribe. All that is being solved, and we're working together.
We've run out of time, but I just want to talk about the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act. What happened to that particular act? Because we understand that it was passed, but it was never enforced.
We'll say it was enforced because it's still in place, and every year they have what they call executive.
So are you saying that it was enforced?
It was enforced.
When was it enforced?
In 2003, and still it's still being enforced. Just yesterday, there was another announcement to say we give you another year of renewing those sanctions, because we have, under it, we have about 141 individuals and companies. And then we also have the OFAC that also controls the movement of assets and also the movement of cash between us and the rest of the world.
But do you not think that people may not just want to invest in Zimbabwe due to the economic crisis in that particular country? I mean, we talk of currency shortages, we talk about electricity shortages, we talk about rampant corruption, one could say. Is it not the real problem, the real root cause of why people are not investing in Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Palisa. That is actually a result, a symptom of the fundamentals that have been tampered with because of the sanction issue. The sanctions collapsed our local currency. That collapse of the local currency had a domino effect on the inflationary pressures. It affected production. It affected international trade. The suspension of the credit lines also created a credit crunch. Even if you ask the Americans, they will tell you what the impact of credit crunch is. You know what happened with the United States of America in terms of property, in terms of the real estate. It was decimated because of the credit crunch. So these are the same things that have happened to Zimbabwe. And also the issue of corruption. People are always talking about the issue of corruption. You know, any country that is subjected to economic sanction is actually a higher corruption perception index. Why? Because in trying to circumvent, to bypass, or to hide, to do things off the ladder because of the sanctions, you end up using third parties. In that process, there's no transparency, there's no accountability. So sanctions create fertile grounds for mismanagement. They create fertile ground also for corruption. So we think corruption and unproductivity is a result of the economic sanctions.
All right, so as I said on my introduction that you're here conversing for the lifting of those sanctions, what are you hoping for? Because last year this time, SADC had spoken against the sanction. You have the African Union now. So what are you hoping for?
We are hoping for progress in terms of the conversation. With the way we are dealing with sanctions this time around, we are not taking the route that is used to be taken before. Our president, President Idi Mnangagwa, he's started it on a different route where he's saying, let's interact, let's converse, let's...
Is there still time to talk and interact and have meetings, really?
This is the time, because it's about engaging, it's about exchanging notes, it's about listening to what the West is talking about and see what we can implement, only those things that we think are within the Constitution, that also safeguard and protect the interests of the Zimbabweans.
So it's something that's not going to happen overnight. It's a process from what you're telling us.
Yeah, it is a process.
All right, I'm afraid time constraints. We have to leave it at this, but thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you, Palisa.
All right, we really appreciate your time. That's the Zimbabwe's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Dr. David Musabayana, talking to us about their calls really for the removal of sanctions against Zimbabwe.